A warmer for the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be chatting it up here in segment number 2 with one of our good friends, Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16. We've got a few SEC teams here in the Sweet 16. Texas, they are the lone double-digit seed that's remaining, so we'll talk about how they've gotten here, how Tennessee is going to be able to match up with Iowa State. Can Alabama be able to pull off their upset as well? A little bit about the offseason as well, like Auburn is still alive in the NIT. We'll certainly talk about that a little bit. If there might be a coaching change or two that happens within the SEC and so much more. So we've got a lot to talk about there. In the final segment, I'm going to get you guys picks and analysis on both games on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday as we hit some bank shots as we have some NIT action. Unfortunately, the CBI did get canceled this year, but you know what? We do have ourselves a lot of fun with regards to what we're going to be getting in the NIT, so we'll get you guys those picks, and I'll be picking every single one of these NIT games, the Crown games next week, and the NCAA Tournament games moving forward, so we're going to be sticking with that as we hit some bank shots, and if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters DM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Well, I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, and, well, we did not have any college basketball games on Monday. Again, we could have used the CBI in our lives. I think that this is a great time to just talk about what we're going to be getting this offseason, and we have seen a few coaching moves as well. Flesh out the coaching moves a little bit. Not going to dive too much into the transfer portal quite yet, and here's the biggest reason why. I'm not going to be on this podcast during the offseason, because keep in mind, this is a podcast that it is going to be going all 365 days this year. If it were a leap year, it would be 366. I keep it going every day of the year because there are 365 Division I teams. There's a lot to keep straight during the season, but one thing I'm not going to do is be like, oh, player X has entered in the transfer portal, and the reason why is that more players entered into the transfer portal than actually returned to their school. Like, it's actually news when a player returns to their school, like teams like Purdue that brought back most of their guys from a season ago. I talked about it last offseason with Navy, bringing back a lot of their guys. They were a nice bankroll building teams. These are teams I most certainly will be highlighting, but that said, I'm not going to be going through every single time a player that averages 5 points per game enters into the transfer portal for those reasons, because again, we've got more guys entering into the transfer portal than are going to be actually returning to where they came. But I certainly am going to be taking a look at the coaching carousel moving forward, as we've seen a few moves already, like Casey Alexander. He last week already from Belmont took that job over at Kansas State. He got hired, and we did see over the last 72 or so hours a few big ones. I'm not going to hit upon this one too much, but I really like what Syracuse did with bringing in Jerry McNamara. We actually talked about that yesterday with our good friend Paul Fritchner, who does great work over at the Rebound Rundown podcast, Field of 68. I feel like that's a great move. It was clearly not working out with Trey Autry. They needed a little bit of a change, and they certainly have been able to get that, so that was a very massive one. I thought a little bit of an underrated move was Scott Cross, who was coaching over at Troy, led them to the NCAA Tournament. He gets a job at Georgia Tech, which I knew UT Arlington was just total fools for letting him go. I have no idea why he was ever fired from that job, but Scott Cross finally getting his first shot at a power conference gig at the age of 51, I think is going to help. They don't necessarily have the world's greatest NIL budget, but they are out there in Atlanta, Georgia. Scott Cross has been able to show to be able to win with multiple different styles. Sometimes it's pressuring, sometimes it's good offense, with like Kevin Hervey and company over at UT Arlington. He's able to win in a wide variety of ways, so I think that is going to be big for them. This is a coaching change that was pretty much done last offseason, but it takes effect now with Greg McDermott. He has decided that he is going to be stepping down. Alan Huss, he was the coach in waiting and actually led High Point to the NCAA Tournament in 2025 before they were able to ascend, and they won a game in the NCAA Tournament this year. This is a pretty rock-solid move with Huss, who was able to do a really good job building up that High Point program. He was able to show that he was able to run just really, really efficient offense, which is what Creighton has been built around. And for McDermott, he accomplished so much over at Creighton. That Elite Eight run in 2023 where they very nearly nearly make the Final Four. He did a nice job building up this program, so we shall see where they're going to be able to go moving forward. As out there in Omaha, Nebraska, have to think that they are seeing what Nebraska, the Cornhuskers, are doing, and they're going to try to stick a little bit of money into that program as well. And then we did see a few big moves here in the last 40 or so hours with Brian Hodgson, who he was linked to the Syracuse job at first. He is going to be taking over at Providence, which Providence was one of the most up-tempo teams in the country. Hodgson and his South Florida team was a top 5 team in terms of total possessions per game. Have to think that he might try to retain a little bit of that backcourt. Obviously, he's probably going to be bringing in quite a few of his own guys. Keep in mind, just 2 short years ago, he was over at Arkansas State. He spent 1 year at South Florida, got them to the NCAA Tournament, to the top of the American, so he has won everywhere that he's been, was off of that Nate Oates' coaching tree, so it's going to be interesting because he's just 39 years old, so he's one of the younger coaches out there at the Power Conference level. Kim English was as well, but it was very clear that that was not getting the job done, and then they're going to be looking for this move to be able to get the job done as well. And I do like this one. Wes Miller heading on over to Charlotte. Charlotte has been a very slow and controlled team under Aaron Farine, and even before that, what they were getting out of the previous regime as well. But for the Charlotte team, I do feel like this is a good move for Wes Miller. He had a lot of success when he was over in the Carolinas, over at UNC Greensboro a few years ago. And for Wes Miller, I think the big key for him is learning from the mistakes of this past season, because when Wes Miller had Cincinnati rocking and rolling, they got back to their roots of good, solid defense and playing a bit more slowly. If you recall, during the previous offseason, he's talking about wanting his team to play fast, and they played fast at the beginning part of the season, and man, it did not work out whatsoever. When Wes Miller finally saw this, it was a little bit too little too late. If he can learn from that, I think that he has a chance to be successful here at Charlotte. And sometimes you just have coaches that they don't cut it at the Power Conference level, but they're really good mid-major coaches. Look at what John Gross has been able to do at Akron. He led Ohio to a Sweet 16 many years ago, got that job at Illinois. It did not work out for him at Illinois, but he's been able to do a really good job over at Akron. You just have some of those coaches that they're much better at the mid-major level rather than the Power Conference level. And Mark Turgeon, by the way, heading on over to Kansas City. That one I think is interesting. Marvin Menzies. Boy, if you bet on Marvin Menzies last season, I think Kansas City had 5 covers last season. Mark Turgeon, I'm not saying that he's the Mona Lisa Vito of great coaches, but we've seen what he's been able to do out there in the Midwest over at Wichita State. He was, in my opinion, an okay coach over at Maryland. I'm not going to say that he was amazing or anything like that, but he was an okay coach out there. So I do think that that one is going to be interesting as well. But this is a lot of what I'm going to be talking about the next few weeks, just because the transfer portal is absolute madness. It is going to be really hard to be able to decipher that, and I'm not going to be sitting here like, oh, here's the list of guys that have entered in the transfer portal. As a matter of fact, I probably would be best off to give you guys a list of guys that don't enter into the transfer portal, because that'll be much shorter. So we're going to be seeing a lot of hoopla, and like I said, that's what I'm going to be spending pretty much every single day doing during the off season here in college basketball. We're going to have 7 months to get caught up on it, and on this podcast here in the next 2 weeks, I do really want to focus on the games themselves. When we don't have games on a day like we did on Monday, want to be focusing on more of these coaching moves, because that is going to be shaping what we're going to be seeing here in the offseason. So did want to give you guys a little bit of a roundup there and just a little bit about what you can expect here in the offseason, as that's unfortunately 2 weeks away. That makes all of us very sad, but what makes me happy, getting aboard Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16. He joins me next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN, because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here, Las Vegas for Cups to Go Soups with myself, Greg Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And it's always great to be joined by this man as we've got Blake Lovell aboard. He does such great work over at Southeastern 16, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball, not just out there in the SEC, but he does a great job covering a little bit of everything. The offseason is going to be coming sooner rather than later, and you guys that listen to this podcast know that he joined me for quite a few conference previews, does a great job in terms of looking at all 365 Division I teams. You're about follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks always for having me, Greg.
It is always a pleasure, Blake. And Blake, what a wild first week of the NCAA tournament where Texas from the SEC with the largest sports budget pretty much out there in all of sports is our biggest Cinderella right now. And just what did you make on the first week of the NCAA tournament? Because no doubt we had some chalky results, but we also did finally get some fireworks at the, shall we say, cost of the SEC with what we saw in that Iowa versus Florida game.
Yeah, and certainly an interesting start to the tournament. We know, again, just looking at the numbers and trends and all that and what the favorites have been able to do. I mean, it's just been impressive, but I mean, it's kind of been the talk is that the gap is closed between the teams that have the resource and the teams that don't necessarily have the same. And I think that's just kind of the trend we've seen. And again, these best teams are kind of just flexing right now and showcasing their strength, except, as you mentioned, for Florida, who just sort of had one of those games that you just don't want to have this time of year. And yeah, Iowa was just better at execution. And I thought a lot of things in that game and quite honestly felt like they deserved to win the game. And so it was just one of those, again, kind of unique sort of scenarios. And as we always say, Greg, basketball is a game of matchups. And that was one where matchup wise, Iowa just got the best of Florida. And now, we get to, instead of what many people thought was going to be the all SEC Sweet 16 in that part of the bracket between Florida and Vanderbilt, we're going to get the all Big Ten between the one that we should have all seen coming, Iowa and Nebraska.
Oh, yes. With Iowa making their first Sweet 16 since 1999, and Nebraska had won as many NCAA tournament games as the two of us going into the NCAA tournament. So you don't see that very often. And going back to that game between Nebraska and Vanderbilt, I thought that was perhaps one of the most high-quality games that we saw all weekend long. Obviously got lost in the shuffle a little bit in that Iowa game, but just what did you see out of that game as well? Because I personally have Vanderbilt going to the Final Four. You're out there in Nashville, Tennessee, so we are both very bummed out about that. Obviously feel great about Nebraska, a program that has been very long suffering, but I thought that was really the game of the night, and I do think that really just encapsulates how big home court environment / how little travel you need to do really does impact the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's just, one of those where you can say what you want, but you can't deny that Nebraska fans just simply, they brought it. I mean, and that's what you want this time of year. And that's why I think the Nebraska-Iowa game is going to be very fascinating just to see from that standpoint, because it was, like you said, I think Vanderbilt-Nebraska has been the best game of the tournament so far. It was just kind of the atmosphere was a big part of that. But yeah, I mean, it was another kind of one of those games that you felt like was sort of a 50-50 toss-up type game. I think for Vanderbilt, Duke Miles just not having one of his sort of usual games really hurt them there. And and you're kind of battling the elements in a game like that, and you're having to withstand some really good runs from Nebraska, and you just were not able to make enough shots at the end, and that's really what it came down to. And so I thought Nebraska, job well done when we look at just kind of what they were able to do and find a way to get the win. They made enough shots, and that was a team too, Greg, I think, coming into it, and I'll be honest, I thought it was one where you looked at Nebraska, I didn't think they were getting enough respect heading into that Troy game. Now they were a popular upset pick. But when you looked at their overall profile, it was not a bad team for a 4 seed. I mean, I don't know why everyone kind of just jumped off of them there, especially when you looked at some of their results. So, yeah, good win for Nebraska and certainly a tough one for Vanderbilt to finish the season that way.
Yeah, I'm still a little bit salty about that one. I feel like you might be a little bit as well. So Misery certainly had company on that one, as Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And a lot of the SEC this week is going to be out there in Chicago, Illinois, because that's where the Alabama versus Michigan game is going to be. Same goes for Tennessee versus Iowa State. Those are going to be Friday games. And how do you take a look at these two games? Because I think that it would be quite a bit of a shocker if Alabama is able to knock off Michigan. But I know you've talked about this with me so much throughout the season. It feels like perhaps the team with the highest ceiling in the SEC is always Alabama, because I feel like they're the one team remaining in this tournament that could spring an upset on anyone with the way that they shoot it from three. And boy, oh boy, could I see them losing this game by 25 plus as well.
That's the thing. I feel like it's the exact same thing when I said to someone earlier. I was like, I honestly believe that Alabama, of the 4 SEC teams left, may have the best chance. And that sounds wild against a team like Michigan, but it doesn't really have much to do with Michigan. It has a lot to do with Alabama and, just the nature of if they're hitting shots like Texas Tech saw, what can happen. And of course, Michigan is not Texas Tech when it comes to the build of this team. I don't think Alabama is going to get anywhere near the second chance opportunities for shots that don't fall. And I don't think they're going to go 19-42. And so I think from that standpoint, it's a tough matchup. There's no question. There's a reason Alabama, opened as a double-digit underdog and all of that. But I will hold that statement still, Greg, and say that I look at the upside of Alabama, and I think if you're trying to craft a team that can beat Michigan, well, look at some of the teams that gave them issues this year, right? Like look at the Wisconsin games, look at the Nebraska game. There are other games too, but what do some of those teams have in common? Looking at the three-point shot and its ability to impact the game. And there's no one out there, I think, unlike when you look at the makeup of Alabama, I just don't know how many teams out there are going to be compared to that, or it's easy to prepare for them. It's just not. And so I think this is one, like you said, if Alabama comes out, they have a little bit of that confidence early, this is going to be a game, and they're going to have a chance to win this game. But if they start off 5 of 18 from three, and they're not getting the shots they usually get, they're not going to get the second chance opportunities via offensive rebounds, and they may get beat by 25. So there's a lot of ways I think this game could go. But yeah, it is fascinating just because of, like we've talked about with Alabama, that NATO style, that approach, it wins. And we've seen that 4 straight years now with this team getting to the Sweet 16. And if they win this one, I think they're going to have a very good chance to get back to the Final Four based on what their next round matchup would be.
Yep, that one is going to be very interesting. And then out there in that same pod, Tennessee may have caught a little bit of a break because with Iowa State, there's the Joshua Jefferson injury. And from everyone I've talked to, and I do know a few people out there in the great state of Iowa, does not sound great to say the least for Jefferson. Tennessee, a 4.5-point underdog. Now, I feel like you might agree with me on this. Not the best matchup for Tennessee with their turnover issues and Iowa State's ability to be able to generate turnovers. But how do you see this game? Because that Jefferson injury, I think, is going to loom very large in this one with the Tennessee team that does such a great job on the glass.
Yeah, it will. And that's going to really, be the story, I think, here is knowing that's what Tennessee is going to do. It really comes down to, can they just take care of the ball? That's the story of this game. There's no other bigger storyline to me because everybody was talking about, well, how did Kentucky turn it over, 20 times? I'm like, I can tell you exactly how Kentucky turned it over 20 times because they're a team that really was inconsistent with the ball this year. They faced a team that pretty much every time they tried to dribble in this angle, that angle, there's a hand there. And you're just, having some unforced turnovers you don't usually make. Tennessee does the same thing. And I think that is one where, man, if they don't value the ball, this one's going to get ugly because I don't like Tennessee necessarily in a trailing scenario. They're playing this Iowa State team that can knock down shots from outside, and you're just trying to figure out how to battle your way back in it as a team that really, we know, Greg, we say it every year, they're going to have some of those stretches where they're struggling to score. And so I like the first 2 matchups against Virginia and Miami of Ohio. I just thought it set up really nicely for Tennessee, but I think this one is almost the opposite as I look at it on paper. And I know this is the closest spread when we talk about the SEC teams in the Sweet 16 of any of these 4 games. But, man, the margin for error here is so slim for Tennessee because if they come out, turning the ball over early, can't get an offensive rhythm, they might get blown out in this game.
Yep, I think that one is going to be so interesting, and that is going to be the name of the game for Tennessee. Take care of the ball, they've got a shot. Don't take care of the ball, they don't. As Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me on Coast to Coast Soups. And the other 2 SEC teams remaining, they are both going to be out there in San Jose, California, which, hey, Texas has less travel than Purdue. Like, you don't see that very often where the top 2 seed is traveling more than the 11th seed, but that's what we've got here with Texas being one of the bigger underdogs in the Sweet 16 at 6.5, and ironically enough, it's actually Alabama who's the biggest underdog at 10.5 points. But that said, how do you take a look at this Texas versus Purdue game? Because for Texas, they came in just so awful on defense in games played away from them. They've looked a little bit better here, but now they go up against a Purdue team that, well, defense is not their strong suit either, but boy, oh boy, are they efficient on offense.
Yeah, you said it. I mean, the difference with Texas has been their defense. You look at the way they were playing, having lost 5 of 6 entering this tournament, and that's why the confidence was so low. I mean, again, we didn't even know if they were going to get in this thing, but the difference has easily been their defense. Like, they've just been much more consistent on that side. And sure, people have pointed out, well, look at kind of the breaks they've caught, right? They played Gonzaga missing a key player. They played BYU missing a key player. That's fine, but their defense has been really good. And I think it's not just about the injuries for teams like that. Like, they have locked in defensively in a way that I've really seen them do consistently for a while. So I think that's going to obviously be the big key when you're facing the most efficient offensive team out there, and it's just a team that knows how to win. Got the older guys who, again, have been in the spot before. It's going to be a pretty tricky matchup from that standpoint in Texas. If you were Texas, you're like, can we just play this game on Monday versus having to wait several days because of the rhythm and the momentum they had for those past 5 days. So I think it is one where this one feels like another tough matchup, which we say this, right? The SEC is an underdog in all these matchups. Like, if any of them advance, someone's going to be pulling off an upset just based on where we are kind of in the bracket. And so I think this is kind of tough for Texas because I do worry about them kind of keeping that same momentum going. And I think they'll be able to score some points here, but I'm not sure if some of those sort of bad habits defensively don't creep in a little bit in a matchup here against the Boilermakers.
Yep, and then the other game involving an SEC team is one that is very high-powered in Arkansas, but now they go up against a rock-solid defense in Arizona. How do you look at this game with an Arkansas team that they can score with anyone? They've got perhaps the most exciting player remaining in the NCAA Tournament, Darius Acuff, who I legitimately believe deserves some recognition as perhaps the number one overall pick in the draft. I think he's playing that well, but you also have an Arizona team on the flip side that has been so strong down low, and we both know this about Arkansas, very much built around their guards, not so much their forwards.
Yeah, and Darius Acuff is obviously good enough to get you to the Final Four, but the story for Arkansas throughout the rest of this tournament, however many games they're playing, is really going to be what everyone else does. And that's why they've been as successful as they've been. Yes, Acuff has helped, but it's really usually been about, all right, Billy Richmond stepping up, playing well. Malik Thomas, again, if he wasn't playing alongside Darius Acuff, we'd be talking about this guy so much in terms of his prolific scoring ability. Trevin Brazile, I think he's the ultimate X factor. If you're picking one player on any of these 16 teams left, to me, it's Trevin Brazile, because if he plays well, Arkansas is going to play well, and they're going to have a chance to pull off the upset against Arizona. If he doesn't play well, then I think they're in big trouble. And so guys like that, Malik Ewan, and you just kind of look at the rotation for Arkansas, which is very short, right? It's not like they're playing a lot of guys right now. And so to me, this is what has gotten them here. The combination of the ultimate playmaking ability of Darius Acuff, but it's combining that with what all these other guys can do, and it's their athleticism, their ability, to run the floor, and their front court. Greg, I can remember it as plain as day. When we're talking about Arkansas coming into the season, we said the same thing. It's really going to be about what does this front court do in these kind of games. The production you're going to get from those guys, you have very little doubt that Darius Acuff, Malik Thomas are going to bring it. I would even say Billy Richmond, I throw in that same category. He's been essential for this team's success. But what happens with that trio of Trevin Brazile, Malik Ewan, and Nick Pringle? That's going to decide, I think, this Arizona game. And if those guys step up and play well, then you're like, okay, we got a shot here. Not to remind anyone, because there are certain fan bases who remember this very well, but we've seen Arkansas in this spot before, feeling like big underdogs in the Sweet 16 against the top seed, and we know what's happened when we've seen that before. So you're never going to count out the Razorbacks, especially when you got a player like Darius Acuff.
Yep, it is going to be a lot of fun to see what we get over these next few days, and the games themselves are going to be a lot of fun. But I do want to ask you about this as well to close things up. Obviously, with the SEC, quite a few teams were able to make the NCAA tournament. We did have a few downers as well. LSU is going to be on a coaching search. We'll see if there's going to be other SEC teams as well. But how do you take a look at this offseason for the SEC and just what we might be able to get out of the team in the NIT as well in Auburn, which obviously there's a lot of controversy there with Stephen Pearl getting that job at the last second as well.
Honestly, I think this is where the domino effect happens. Again, anytime right now, just given the SEC's success in basketball, anytime there's a big job opening nationally, these SEC coaches are going to be coveted. We know who the ones are, right? For the longest time, it was always Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl and whoever else. That was it. Like, who's going to come in and maybe grab one of these guys? Well, Bruce Pearl's out. Nate Oates is still going to be a popular choice for any of these big job openings. And we know which one I'm talking about. North Carolina could be the big domino. Kansas could be a big domino in terms of where, guys wind up. And that's where, when you're looking at the coaching roster in the SEC right now, when you have, a Nate Oates, when you have Mark Byington, when you have Chris Beard and Bucky McMillan, and you just keep going down the line of guys that you think could potentially, in the right scenario, be one of these just guys that some other program like a Kansas, like a North Carolina, is going to throw as much money as possible at to say, here you go. You're going to have a much bigger NIL budget. You're going to be able to come here and win and get closer to winning a national championship. That's where we find ourselves in terms of like this SEC coaching roster right now. And I think it's going to be interesting. Like you said, we kind of know what to expect with some of the teams that we weren't sure about. Oklahoma and South Carolina, those are locked in with Porter Moser and Lamont Paris continuing on. We still don't have much clarity on LSU and Mac McMahon, which to me is just not necessarily baffling because I've seen the way LSU has played out other coaching searches, Greg, and you can't say I'm surprised by this, but I mean, at some point you've got to make this decision because you can't afford to wait in this era and have this uncertainty because that's not doing anything positive for your program. And so they're going to have to make a decision very soon here, I think, to figure that part out. But yeah, the bigger storyline in the SEC from a coaching standpoint is absolutely going to be a matter of, are any of these coaches poached to a potential North Carolina, or Kansas, and how does that start the domino with other potential jobs? That's going to be a big thing to watch here.
Yep, keep in mind what happened when Eric Musselman and company, they had that domino effect. I think that it was actually the fact that Eddie Enfield took the SMU job. Musselman goes to USC, and then that leads to John Calipari going on over to Arkansas. It completely changed the landscape of the SEC. So we're probably going to see one of those this offseason. It's why we love college basketball, and that's why it's a 12-month out of the year sport. And Blake, you do cover it all 12 months out of the year. You do such an amazing job over at Southeastern 16. You're dialed in on all the games. You're dialed in on the offseason and so much more. So love to get people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you can find all of our SEC stuff over at Southeastern 16 on YouTube. Of course, we're covering all these SEC teams left and just the tournament in general. So you can get our daily thoughts over there on that and everything else college basketball. You can follow me on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell.
And Blake does such an amazing job looking at this great sport, and every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on both games on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday. As we have some big time. And we're back here, lovely Las Vegas, for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by our good friend Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So big thanks to Blake for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on both games on the betting board for this college basketball Tuesday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do note that as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at gunit_81. Very easy to go in Las Vegas rotation order. This is time order, so that keeps things all nice, neat, clean, and easy. How about if we get things started with 601, 602, Wichita State is going to be playing against Tulsa. Tulsa is a favorite of 4 to 4.5 points, and your total on this game, 151.5 to 152.5. I made a total of a 154. I do like the over. You've got two teams that are not really looking to push a bunch of tempo, but you've got a pair of teams that aren't super duper slow either. Tulsa's about 123rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Wichita State, they're checking in 143rd, and for Tulsa, this has been a team that has been very rock solid with their overall efficiency, 12th in the country. In terms of points scored on a per possession basis, they shoot over 39% for three-point range. That's a top 10 mark in the country. Now, last time they played against Wichita State, they lost that game. I believe it was 81 to 69, but do keep in mind that Tulsa was playing in the American Conference Tournament. They had to overcome a triple overtime game in order to get to that contest. Wichita State was rested, so I think that that needs to be taken into account. And for Tulsa, they've been neither here nor there with their defense. In their home games, they do rank outside the top 175 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. For Wichita State, name of the game for them is being able to grab second and third chances, fourth in the country in terms of percentage of their missed shots that result in an offensive rebound in games played away from home. And Wichita State is a good perimeter defense that will allow opponents to shoot 31.1% from three overall, 37th in the country. That does go up to 32.5% away from home, but they've got a dynamo scorer themselves in Keenan Giles, who's been shooting just a hair below 40% from three-point range for about the entirety of this season, very much as your top scorer, as he's been able to supply the team with 18 plus points per game. And then Kieran Boyd has been able to do a nice job stepping up with about 10.5 points, 5.5 boards. He shoots 35.5% from three. The Wilberg has been able to give you 8 boards, a little bit over a block, 9 points per game, but I do think that for this Tulsa team, they're going to be able to do an okay job in terms of being able to hold up here. Now, it is a Wichita State team that they're looking to pile drive you inside. They're top 75 team in terms of percentage of field goal attempts by opponents that come from inside the three-point line, but Tulsa, they execute pretty well on the inside as well. Top 75 team with regards to their two-point shooting percentage with David Green, along with Tylen Riley, combining for about 33 points per game, and they shoot 39.5% for three. Miles Barnstable and Ade Pupla have been able to both shoot over 40% for three-point range. Barnstable is able to to give you 14.5 points per game. I hope that I'm saying it correct. Popula, hopefully that is it. I think Pupla would sound great, but he shoots 41% from 3. He's come on strong here in the back half of the season, and the team does a relatively okay job on the glass. Tyler Barron, he's been able to give you about 5 boards, 6.5 points per contest. Ian Schmeichel, Roma Dean, they both give you between 3.6 to 3.7 rebounds per game. Obviously, Wichita State going to have a little bit of an edge there, but that said, if you look at defensive rebound percentage, Tulsa has been a top 110 team with that regard, and I do think that the free throw shooting disparity, Tulsa 20th in the country, they shoot over 77.5% at the free throw line. Wichita State outside the top 300, shooting less than 69.5%, could be the difference in the cover. So, semi-line at 6-1 to lay with Wichita State. I do like the over. Semi-total 154. Wrap things up with 603, 604. St. Joe's, they hope to not be average Joe's as they're on the road against New Mexico. New Mexico is a 10.5 to an 11.5 point favorite. It's on this game. You're finding it at a 152.5. I do like the under. I semi-total at a 145.5. New Mexico is fast, but they're not aggressively fast. 110th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. St. Joe's is a relatively mid-tempo team at about 211th in terms of total possessions per game, and these are two relatively solid defenses for this St. Joe's team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Right now they are checking in 49th in the country. New Mexico is 46th, and they're doing so in different ways, as you've got a St. Joe's team that has been really good in terms of being able to guard the inside, in terms of opponent shot block percentage, top 40 mark in the country. Justice Shabor, he's been able to give you 5 points, 5.5 boards, and about 2 blocks per contest for St. Joe's. They're not really a team that's going to put you under duress and generate turnovers. New Mexico is. New Mexico 42nd in terms of turnovers generated on a per possession basis, 16th in opponent's 3-point shooting percentage at 30.4%, but can be at a little bit more on the inside, which helps out a St. Joe's team that they're really not looking to bomb a lot from 3. They're 325th in the country with their own 3-point shooting percentage. That hovers in the neighborhood about 30.9%. Meanwhile, for New Mexico, down low, they're outside the top 75 with their own 2-point shooting percentage. In terms of opponent's 2-point shooting percentage, that's 246th. Meanwhile, for St. Joseph's, they've been able to do a pretty good job in terms of guarding on the inside, 37th in the country. And for St. Joe's, the big reason why their season was able to get back on track here in the back half of the season was because of what they were able to get out of Jaden Glover, who's been able to give the team over 15 points per contest. He's really the lone guy that is reliable from 3-point range, as he shoots about 35.5% from the outside. Derek Simpson, 5.3 boards, 5.3 assists, 13.5 points per game. They've had this year Haskins be able to step up with about 6.5 rebounds per game. And on the flip side for New Mexico, Jake Hall has been the dynamo scorer for this team. He shoots over 40% from 3-point range, supplies the team with about 16 points per game. As a matter of fact, up to now 45% from 3-point range. Tomislav Bujan, he does a nice job down low with about 12.5 points, 10.5 rebounds per game. He is the one guy in the roster, though, that gives you over 4.4 rebounds per game, even with Luke Hapoy being able to give you 4.5 rebounds per game. You do have Dayton Albury, who shoots 39% from the outside, 12 points per game, and it is a New Mexico team that's been able to shoot it relatively well from 3, but also with St. Joe's, they're allowing teams who only shoot about 31.7% from 3-point range. That is a top 55 mark in the country, so while they do a little bit more on the inside, maybe they will hold up on the outside as well. That's going to be big against a New Mexico team that's shooting about 36.3% from 3, 48th in the country. I do think that the defense holds up, so we'll take the points with St. Joe's, made them a 9.5 point dog. I like the under, so I may total 145.5, and that'll wrap things up for the Tuesday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16. He joined me in the last segment. If you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, you have one or two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Coming at you guys every single day with picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. And once we get to the off season, we're going to be rounding up all of those news and notes as well. So I appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.